God's chosen ones. These 7 signs mean you're no longer awakening. You're being activated. They told you to wait, to keep healing, to stay hidden until you were more ready. But your soul keeps whispering, move, now. You've cried the tears, read the books, walked through silence and fire. But what if I told you your awakening was never the destination? It was the doorway. Because, chosen one, the time for seeking has passed. The season of activation is here. No more signs, no more waiting. Now, you use your powers. And if you are God's chosen one, this message was written in heaven with your name on it. Welcome to the next chapter. The road was never the destination. The wind had changed again. Naomi could feel it long before the trees bowed or the clouds scattered. There was something sacred about the way autumn lingered in her small Tennessee town, as if heaven had pressed pause just for her. Outside, golden leaves whispered across the worn porch like pages of a book God was still writing. Inside, the farmhouse held its breath. Naomi sat at her kitchen table, the same table where she had once begged for answers through tears, where coffee stains marked old journals and candle wax had melted into prayer. The Bible lay open in front of her. Psalm 25. She wasn't reading it. She was listening, not with her ears but with her spirit. For years this was the sacred rhythm of her life. Wake early, pray hard, wait longer. She had walked the road of awakening with obedience, not always joy. She fasted when no one was watching. She left rooms when her spirit said no, even if her heart still wanted yes. She buried friendships that couldn't survive her becoming. Still, she stayed faithful. But lately, the signs had stopped. The dreams had gone still. Heaven had grown quiet. Not distant, but focused. And Naomi, who once begged for another prophetic word, now sat in a holy stillness that felt like the calm before a divine eruption. She couldn't explain it, only feel it. Like a veil was lifting, not from the world, but from her soul. She no longer wanted more confirmation, she wanted movement. For a long time, awakening was enough. She had mistaken that sacred season of revelation as her final destination. But something in her had shifted. She was no longer just searching. She was being summoned. Naomi looked around. Chipped white cabinets, ticking wall clock, silence so thick it felt alive. And yet something eternal was stirring in her belly. Not anxiety, not fear, but urgency. The kind that doesn't scream. It pulses. And in the center of that pulsing stillness, she heard it again. The road was never the destination. It was the preparation. A hand moved instinctively over her chest, pressing against the ache that was somehow not pain, but purpose. She wasn't lost. She wasn't broken. She was being called forward, not to wake up, not to wait, but to rise. So she exhaled slowly, closed her Bible, and whispered the words she didn't fully understand, but completely meant. Lord, if this is the moment you've been preparing me for, then let it begin. Naomi's town. Early morning mist floats over the water like a breath held by heaven. The world was still sleeping when Naomi slipped out of the house. She didn't need an alarm anymore. Her spirit stirred her before dawn. There was no plan, no sermon, no journal prompt, just a pull. The kind that doesn't come from outside, but within. She walked barefoot down the path behind her farmhouse, where the grass kissed her feet with dew and the sky was still painted in the soft blues and pinks of becoming. And then, there it was, the river. It had always been there, winding like a ribbon through the hills. humming a song only the soul could hear. But today, it looked different. Or maybe she did. She sat on a flat rock near the edge and closed her eyes. The sound of flowing water filled her ears. But there was no separation, no distance between her and the stream. For the first time in her life, Naomi didn't feel like a woman watching creation. She felt like creation itself. She didn't see the river. She was the river. The wind that danced across the surface. It was in her lungs. The current that moved with purpose. It was in her veins. The stillness and the flow both lived inside her now. For years, Naomi had searched for God in the sky, in miracles, in signs and messages. She begged for proof, for divine instruction, for something to anchor her aching. She walked around with a Bible in her hand and a question in her heart. Where are you, Lord? But today, she didn't need to ask, because he wasn't far. He was here, in the warmth of the sun on her shoulder, in the rhythm of her breath, in the echo of her heartbeat, steady and eternal. She no longer felt like a soul lost in a vast universe. She was the universe, wrapped in skin, walking on purpose, breathing the breath of the divine, and in that revelation something unlocked. She remembered the nights she wept alone, begging for signs. The moments she asked if she belonged. The years she feared she was drifting without direction. But now, she knew. She had never been separate. Not from God, not from truth, not from love, just from the awareness of it. Naomi opened her eyes and looked at her reflection in the water. She didn't just see her face. She saw the sky, the trees, the light, and it was all one. No more ego. No more asking for signs to prove what her soul already knew. No more waiting to feel worthy of divine connection. It had always been hers, and now she carried it. She stood slowly, brushing the dew from her legs. The air moved with her, like a cloak of grace had just settled on her shoulders. I'm not waiting anymore, she whispered. I am already with you. From that moment, Naomi stopped walking toward God and started walking with him. Because once the illusion of separation breaks, so does every excuse not to step into divine authority. She wasn't just seen by heaven, she was heaven in motion. Part 2. The knowing. You trust your intuition without proof. A Saturday morning farmer's market, full of laughter, fresh bread and divine appointments hidden in plain sight. Naomi didn't plan to go. She had her list from the local grocery store like always. Almond milk, apples, something simple for dinner. But as she reached for her keys, she felt it. That tug, not from her mind, not even from emotion, but from somewhere deeper, the place where heaven and soul touch. It was a knowing, a nudge, the quiet voice she'd learned not to argue with. So instead of turning left toward the store, she turned right toward the town square. The farmer's market was already bustling. Children tugged on their parents' sleeves, bees floated lazily over flower stands, and the air smelled like honey and wood smoke. She didn't know what she was looking for, but something in her did. As she moved past tables of homemade jam and sweet potatoes, her eyes landed on a woman standing alone by the corner. Maybe late 50s, well-dressed, but with eyes that looked like they'd cried behind closed doors. Naomi's heart pulled, the way it always did when spirit whispered, "There, her." The woman was holding a bouquet she hadn't yet paid for. Her lips were tight, her posture perfect. But her spirit... Naomi didn't hesitate. She walked up, smiled gently, and said the first thing that came into her spirit, not her mind. "You're not breaking. You're blooming, even if it hurts." The woman froze, her mouth trembled, and then she broke, not into pieces, but into truth. Tears welled up, uninvited and unstoppable. She looked at Naomi like she was a mirror from heaven. "How did you know?" she whispered. Naomi didn't answer with logic. She didn't explain vibration or prophetic insight. She simply took her hand and said, "Because I've been there, and God never wastes our pain." Oh. They stood together in silence for a moment, like the world had paused. A sacred transaction, a wound acknowledged, a burden lifted. No church walls, no sermon, just obedience. As Naomi walked away, she didn't need validation. She didn't need to second-guess what had just happened. She knew. She knew she had been used by heaven. She knew the voice inside her wasn't imagination. It was instruction, clear, direct, divine. There was a time when she would have questioned it. A time when she would have looked for 3 signs and a second opinion. But now she obeyed without explanation, because she trusted her knowing more than she trusted her logic. Flashback. She remembered ignoring that voice once, years ago, and watching something fall apart because she didn't speak when she should have. That lesson burned deep. Since then, she had promised, "Lord, if you speak, I will move, even if I don't understand." And he had taken her at her word. That day at the market, Naomi didn't buy apples. She didn't need to. She had already received her portion. She drove home with the windows down, the wind tangling her hair, the spirit still lingering. There was no dramatic music, no thunderclap, just peace. That deep cellular peace that comes when obedience becomes instinct. Her hands gripped the wheel, but her spirit was flying. She didn't need confirmation. He was the confirmation, because when the chosen awaken fully, intuition doesn't ask permission. It becomes the voice of destiny in motion. Part 3. The release. Material desires no longer control you. Downtown office building. Late afternoon, sunlight bleeds through tall windows. Inside, a conference room buzzes with congratulations. The email had come in that morning. Subject: leadership opportunity, regional director position. Naomi had stared at it longer than she should have. A few years ago, she would have leapt out of her chair. This role, this title, would have been everything she thought she wanted. Recognition, the better paycheck, corner office with a view, the kind of promotion that made people whisper, "She's made it." She had done all the right things, played by the rules, stayed late, spoke carefully, smiled even when disrespected. And now, it was hers. The team gathered in the glass conference room, balloons, cupcakes. The new manager grinned as he placed his hand on Naomi's shoulder and said, "We're lucky to have someone like you stepping up." Everyone clapped, but Naomi didn't hear it. She was listening for something else, that inner sound, that sacred yes, but it never came. Instead, a strange quiet settled in her chest. Not fear, not anxiety, just silence. She stood there, blinking as her co-workers smiled, and in that moment, a question dropped into her soul like thunder. Are you chasing a promotion or your purpose? She excused herself quietly and stepped out onto the rooftop terrace. The air was crisp. The city below her buzzed like a hive. She leaned against the railing and looked out at the skyline. All the glass and steel, the towers built by striving. And for the first time, she didn't want it. Not because she was afraid, but because she was free. She thought back to the younger version of herself, the one who believed her value came from titles, the one who thought wealth would finally make her feel safe, the one who confused applause with approval. That woman had died, in the wilderness of awakening. What stood here now was not chasing anything. She was anchored. Naomi smiled, not because she was proud, but because she was finally untangled from the need to prove, from the addiction to validation, from the lie that said more money meant more meaning. She had learned something in the fire. True abundance isn't what you hold in your hand, it's what you refuse to let control your heart. She looked up at the sky and whispered, "Lord, if it's not aligned with my assignment, I release it." And she meant it. The next day, she declined the offer. No long explanation, no apologies, just peace. Her manager was stunned. "You're passing on this? You know what kind of opportunity this is, right?" Naomi just smiled and replied, "Yes, and I've already received a better one." He didn't understand. He didn't need to, because this wasn't about career paths anymore. This was about the path God had cleared, the one no corporate ladder could ever touch. Later that week, Naomi walked through the farmer's market again. No makeup, no heels, no name tag. But everyone noticed her, not because of what she wore, but because of what she carried. An authority, a peace, a presence that didn't need permission to shine. She had become someone who no longer chased wealth, because she was wealth, not in her bank account, but in her spirit. And that, she knew now, was the kind of richness no title could ever offer. Part 4. The silence. You've embraced solitude and found peace. Setting. A weathered cabin nestled in the Tennessee woods. Early winter, fire crackling inside. Naomi has unplugged. No phone, no internet, just the quiet hum of creation and the voice of God. The drive had been long, winding through bare trees and fog-soaked roads. Naomi hadn't told anyone where she was going, not because she didn't trust them, but because this wasn't a trip for explanation. It was an exodus, from noise, from people, from everything that wasn't absolutely sacred. The cabin sat at the edge of a frozen lake, its windows glowing like lanterns in the dusk. No neighbors, no signal, just stillness, thick as wool, holy as oil. She stepped inside, dropped her bag, and breathed. Not just with her lungs, with her soul. The first night was the hardest. The silence stretched wide. It echoed her doubts. It surfaced buried voices. She reached for her phone, but remembered she'd left it in the glove box on purpose. No distractions, no scrolling, no filling the void with sound, only presence. She stared at the fire, listened to it crack and spit like it had a story of its own. Her thoughts grew loud, then soft, then still, and in that stillness he came. Not in a vision, not in a booming word, but in the way the wind whispered against the window pane. "You don't need the world to keep you company," the spirit breathed. "You have me." By the second day, she started to remember who she was before the world told her who to be. She sang old hymns out loud, the ones her grandmother used to hum while shelling peas. She walked by the lake, wrapped in a wool blanket, letting the cold slap her cheeks and the beauty hush her mind. And she realized she wasn't lonely. She was whole. She thought about how many times she'd tried to fill the silence, how often she'd accepted invitations she didn't want, answered texts she didn't have energy for, laughed in rooms where her soul felt unseen, because being alone used to feel like punishment. But now, it felt like power. One afternoon, as snow began to fall gently outside, Naomi sat on the floor with a cup of tea pressed to her chest and whispered, "This is enough. I am enough." No one heard her, but heaven did. In the solitude, she met the version of herself who didn't perform. Not the put-together professional, not the wise friend, just Naomi. rested, real, and she liked her, not because of what she produced, but because of what she carried. Well, the kind that doesn't need a witness. By the time she packed to leave, the silence wasn't something she was running from, and it was something she was taking with her, because solitude had become her sanctuary, and peace, her new authority. She would return to the noise eventually, to the city, to the needs of others. But now she would return different, not pulled by the world, but anchored by heaven. Because once you've found God in the quiet, you no longer beg to be seen. You walk into every room already known. Part 5. The Magnet. You attract people who need your light. A small-town cafe. Mid-morning light spills through frosted windows. Naomi sits alone with her journal, unaware that heaven has scheduled an appointment. She didn't come here to be noticed. Naomi simply wanted warmth, a booth in the corner, a cup of black coffee, and a few quiet moments to let her thoughts spill onto the page. The cafe was quiet, a soft hum of conversations, forks tapping ceramic, the low hiss of steamed milk behind the counter. The kind of place where no one asked too many questions. And that's exactly what she needed. She pulled out her pen and started to write. Not a grocery list or a to-do list, but the kind of writing that came from the soul's overflow. No filters, just truth. But before she could finish the first sentence, she felt it. That shift. The air grew heavier, like spirit had stepped into the room. She looked up and saw him. A man, maybe late 20s, sitting at the bar alone, shoulders hunched, hood pulled low. He wasn't looking at her, but his soul was screaming. Naomi didn't stare, she just listened. Not to words, but to the whisper behind the scene. And the whisper said, "Needs light, yours." She fought it at first. He doesn't know me. What would I even say? But obedience wasn't a debate anymore, not in this season. So she stood, walked over gently, and placed a napkin beside his cup. On it, just 3 words. God still sees. She didn't wait for a response. She walked back to her booth, picked up her pen, and continued writing like she hadn't just opened a doorway in someone's soul. Minutes passed. Then, a whisper of footsteps. He stood by her table now, holding the napkin like it was holy. Tears lined his eyes. "I was going to end it today," he said, barely audible. No one has looked me in the eyes in weeks." Naomi didn't flinch. She closed her journal, reached out and took his hand, not in dramatic display, but in sacred solidarity. "You were never invisible," she said. "He's been with you the whole time." He wept. Not loudly, not for attention, just release. He left without asking her name, but he left it. The waitress came over later, refilled Naomi's coffee, and whispered, "Whatever you said to him, thank you." Naomi simply nodded, as it wasn't about her. It never had been. That night, she journaled the moment with reverence. Not because she wanted to remember her words, but because she wanted to remember the pattern. She had seen it before. People drawn to her without knowing why. Strangers opening their souls like they knew she'd understand. Friends confessing that something about her made them feel safe. And now she understood why. It wasn't charisma. It wasn't chance. It was like she didn't have to chase purpose anymore. Purpose kept finding her. Not in pulpits, not in platforms, but in coffee shops, in grocery aisles, on park benches. Wherever pain passed by, her presence became sanctuary. Naomi had become what she once searched for, a safe place, a reminder, a vessel of light in a world full of shadows. And now she guarded that light, not with pride, but with prayer. because people weren't just drawn to her personality, they were being sent to her assignment. She didn't have to do anything loud to be powerful. She just had to be present. Part 6. The vision. You can see through illusion and deception. A crowded church revival meeting. The sanctuary glows with stained glass and stage lights, but beneath the worship and applause, something feels off. The music was loud. Hands were raised. The preacher's voice boomed. People shouted amen like thunder. But Naomi's spirit grew quiet. She sat near the back, alone in a sea of lifted hands and performance prayers. She had been invited by a well-meaning friend. They called it a revival, but something inside her whispered otherwise. She watched the man on stage, well-dressed, charming, full of charisma. But charisma wasn't the same as character, and the deeper he spoke, the more her spirit recoiled. He said the right words, quoted the right scriptures, commanded the room, but heaven wasn't moving. God wasn't in the noise. Naomi's discernment kicked in like a wind through her chest, invisible, undeniable. This is not truth. This is theater. She glanced around the room. Some were swaying, some crying, but others, like her, had gone still. A woman 2 rows down sat with her eyes open, unmoved. A teenager nearby looked confused. Something was cracking in the atmosphere, and Naomi felt it in her bones. You can't fake the spirit to those who carry him. Later, after the service ended, her friend beamed. Wasn't that amazing? So powerful, right? Naomi just offered a kind smile. She didn't argue, because discernment doesn't always require a confrontation. Sometimes it just requires clarity and stillness. The next week, the news came. The man from the stage, caught in scandal, a hidden life, a broken flock. The headlines were loud, but Naomi didn't need them. She had already seen it. Before it was exposed, it was revealed. She walked into her kitchen that night and opened her Bible, not for answers, but for alignment. "Lord," she whispered, "teach me to see what others miss, but to never lose compassion when I do." That was the difference between pride and prophetic sight. Not just seeing truth, but staying humble with it. Discernment was no longer something she prayed for occasionally. It was the lens through which she now lived. She could walk into a room and feel the energy shift, hear a compliment, and know if it was sincere or strategic. Smell manipulation in the air long before it opened its mouth. But she never used it to elevate herself, only to protect the assignment. There was a time Naomi second-guessed this gift. She wondered if she was being judgmental, overly sensitive, dramatic. But the more she trusted the nudge, the more she realized it was never wrong. It had saved her, guided her, warned her of wolves in sheep's clothing. Now she moved like a watchman, quiet, sharp, alert. "Lord, make me dangerous to deception," she had once prayed, and he had. She no longer needed to be told who was for her and who was not. She didn't need a red flag to flash in the sky. The moment someone spoke, their spirit spoke louder. Not to her ears, but to her knowing. People would sometimes say, "You just see things others don't." And she'd smile softly, because they were right. She did. But the most beautiful part? She no longer feared the truth she saw. She didn't wish to unsee it anymore. Because it no longer burdened her, it armed her. And when the world tried to pull her into fear, into illusion, into distraction, she just stood still, eyes open, spirit calm. Because when you carry truth, you become untouchable. Part 7. The mission. You feel called and you're ready. A mountaintop at sunrise. Naomi stands at the edge, journal in hand, breath visible in the cold. Below her, a valley shimmers in golden light. Above her, destiny waits. The air was thin up here. Naomi could feel every heartbeat, every breath, every echo of the years that led her to this very edge. She had hiked the last mile in silence, boots crunching on frost-kissed earth, the sky slowly shifting from indigo to gold. She wasn't here for the view. She was here for the answer. She unzipped her coat and reached for the letter in her bag, the invitation. A women's retreat had asked her to speak, not just attend, not just pray behind the scenes, but stand up, lead, pour out. She'd been avoiding the decision for weeks, not because she didn't want it, but because this time it mattered. She opened her journal and looked at the words she'd written 2 nights ago. Lord, if it's time, tell me. I'll go where you send me. But this morning, no clouds had formed letters, no burning bushes, just the wind, the light, the stillness. And yet, she knew, the same way she knew how to breathe, the same way she knew when someone needed prayer, when to walk away, when to stay silent. This wasn't a maybe anymore. This was the moment. She looked out over the valley, not as a woman wondering who she was, but as a woman who remembered. She saw the years she cried in silence, the nights she asked why she wasn't chosen, the people who walked away when she changed, the days she doubted if she was even heard. But all along she was being formed. And now she didn't feel small anymore. She didn't feel unready. She didn't feel like a student of pain. She felt like a messenger. Her voice trembled, but her spine stood straight. She whispered into the morning air, I say, not because I feel ready, but because I finally believe I was born for this. The sun broke over the horizon like a trumpet blast from heaven, and in that golden hush, Naomi stepped into a truth deeper than calling. She had become the answer to someone else's prayer. She thought of the girl who would be sitting in that audience, the one questioning if God still speaks, if she's too broken, too late, too lost. And Naomi's yes was for her, because chosen ones don't step up for applause. They rise for assignments. As she turned to walk back down the mountain, her shoulders felt lighter, not because the weight was gone, but because the anointing had made her strong enough to carry it. There was no going back now, no hiding, no delaying. The mission had begun, not in front of crowds, not with flashing lights, but with one quiet, unshakable whisper. Go, I am with you, the awakened rise. The room was small, maybe 20 people seated in a circle of folding chairs. No stage, no spotlight, just string lights hung gently along the ceiling, and the faint smell of coffee and courage in the air. Naomi stood in the center, not because she needed to, but because heaven asked her to. Her palms were open, her voice steady, and though her heart beat loud in her chest, she was not afraid. I used to think my awakening was the destination, she said, eyes scanning the room. A few nodded. One woman wiped a tear. I thought the pain had a point, just so I could say, I survived. But now I know I wasn't just waking up for me. I was waking up for you too. She paused, letting the silence wrap itself around them like a warm coat. Your story doesn't end when the pain stops. It begins when you answer the call, not the loud one the world demands, the quiet one you hear when no one's watching, the one that says, you were born for this. Naomi didn't preach. She testified, not with volume but with weight, because truth doesn't need shouting when it carries oil. Afterward, a young woman approached her, notebook pressed to her chest. You said things I didn't even know I needed to hear, she whispered. It's like you were reading my thoughts. Naomi smiled, not surprised, just surrendered. That's how the Spirit works, she said. It speaks through the ones who once felt voiceless. She stepped outside into the cool night air, looked up at the stars, and inhaled slowly. Everything felt right. Not perfect, not painless, but aligned. Because the truth was, she didn't need a platform to be powerful. She didn't need thousands of followers to be sent. She just needed her yes. And she had given it fully. And as Naomi walked to her car, wind catching her coat, she whispered, "I am no longer waking up. I am walking out." She had become what heaven needed in this hour. A woman awakened and activated. And somewhere in the spirit realm, a trumpet sounded. Because when the awakened rise, the earth shifts. Your awakening was not the finish line. It was the invitation to begin. You are not called to watch the world shift. You are called to be the shift. God didn't awaken you to admire the light. He awakened you to become it. If this story resonated with your soul, type 777 in the comments. If you've walked through the fire and come out glowing, share this message so someone else can find their light too. And if you feel led to support this journey, let it be your gift of faith. Details in the description.